Ambassador Arvizu, thank you very much for granting this interview to Euronews Albania.
Thank you for the invitation. Good morning. I guess it's afternoon your time or evening. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to see you again.
And I see you smiling so far. You're happy with the result of candidate Biden, even though analysts and networks are saying that the race is too close to call.
Well, it's still going on. That is correct. And I think it's probably going to continue for a couple more days. I went to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning. And was exhausted. I'm still kind of exhausted, but I was quite discouraged when I went to bed. But a lot has happened just in the last few hours. As I mentioned, it's still ongoing, but right now Mr. Biden has a lead, and I believe that he has a clear path to victory. It would be very narrow, but he has a clear path. So I'm encouraged about that. But clearly, this is a very divided country, and the outcome is not going to be ideal. America is going to be a very divided country after this election.
Compared to last presidential elections in 2016, there are only 3 states that, as you call it in your language there, changed colors: Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. These states could provide the victory, the win for Joe Biden. Why did they flip from red to blue, in your analysis?
Well, as you probably know, the polls indicated that more states would probably flip from red to blue. And so you mentioned those 3, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I think there's a possibility that Pennsylvania may also flip, and even Georgia. So we don't know yet. But I think what the analysts are saying today is that the Trump supporters, especially in the rural areas, in the countryside, they are really strong supporters of Mr. Trump. And they came out and they voted in very large numbers. So there was some speculation about a blue wave that
surge,
clearly
yeah.
did
What was that blue wave surge?
It's hard to say, Ilva. It really is. And I look at myself, and maybe I'm part of the problem, if you will, because I live here in Washington, D.C. Most of my friends, my colleagues are people who are professionals, well-educated, good income, have a positive outlook about the world, concerned about climate change. So when I talk to these people, we say, how it just seems natural that we would think this way. But we all have family and friends who think differently. I'm from Colorado, and I'm in touch with a few people there. Some of them think like I do, but there are others who have a very different view. They are Trump supporters, 100%. And so it's a little bit difficult, I think, for us to have a genuine dialogue with one another as Americans. And that's a big problem.
Biden won D.C. by 96%, am I wrong?
I think that's correct. That always happens in Washington, D.C.
How is that possible? Only 4% for Trump?
I know. But that is traditionally the case. Washington, D.C., first of all, it's not that large. I mean, it's a big city, but it only has 3 electoral votes. Washington, D.C. has a lot of young people, a lot of professional workers, very well educated, good incomes, and also a lot of African Americans. It's about 50% African American. And so, yes, I know it's remarkable, but my wife often says, who are the 4 people voting for the Republicans?
It sounds a little bit funny, but I know it's very serious, the situation in America this time. And actually, these elections and the polarization and the rhetoric, I think, probably reminded you of Albania?
Sadly, yes, it did. And you're absolutely right. I've kind of thought about my time in Albania and how Albanians go through, the ups and downs, like the roller coaster of elections. And we've had close elections in the U.S. before. That's not unusual. And I think about 2000, the year 2000 specifically. But I think, to be honest, because of Mr. Trump and some of his supporters, their rhetoric, the constant, attack on the media, that just heightens anxiety and just creates more tension. So it's unfortunate, but we still have a very professional system of counting the votes and tabulating them, and so I think in the end that will help the United States. But yes, in Albania, unfortunately, the institutions I think can be pressured a little bit more than here. I'm not saying that the U.S. institutions are perfect, but I think we have a longer tradition about elections and this kind of thing. So
yeah.
Let's be hopeful.
Ambassador Arvizu, as we speak, Richard Grenell has been tweeting to calling the Arizona voters to make sure their vote was counted, to make it legal. And even earlier, President Trump said that he would send forward his case to the Supreme Court, even though he claimed what he thought was a victory. And then we had some tweets going in the afternoon with our time here. What is going to happen? What can the Supreme Court do, and how long can this process delay the result?
Well, and I realize we have limited time, so I'll try to summarize it. Because of the pandemic, this year we've had a very unusual situation with a large number of voters, like myself, either voting early or using a mail-in ballot. Now, in other times, we have had mail-in ballots, we've had early voting, that's not unusual. But because of the pandemic, many states, not all of them, but many states have opened it up this year. In fact, not just opened it up, but encouraged people to vote early. And so yesterday, each state, or at least most of the states, they had to deal with people who voted on November the 3rd. They had to deal with the mail-in ballots, and they also had to deal with people who voted early. So you can just see from that it's very complicated, but they're good. These election people are extremely good at what they do. They're very professional. But when Mr. Trump realized that the result was not going his way, he started raising questions about that. As far as the legal process, obviously everybody believes that the votes should be counted. I don't think anybody disputes that. But because it is so close, we fully expect Mr. Trump to probably try to contest that in court. I don't know on what grounds. There's no indication of fraud, or at least I haven't seen anything like that. But we have to see.
Mr. Arvizu, there are analysts, of course, trying to understand why is the race so close, neck to neck, basically. Considering the first mandate of Donald Trump as president of United States, and considering what the polls were also saying, predicting Joe Biden victory. And there are some arguments, but I would like your opinion on some critics who say that Donald Trump is winning because of his economic policies and due to a very weak rival, such as Joe Biden?
Great questions. again, I personally am very surprised that Mr. Trump has done so well. But clearly, it's not just him. The House of Representatives, I think the Democrats will retain the majority, and Nancy Pelosi will be the speaker, but it's going to be less of a majority than before. So there's a lot of support for Mr. Trump. And as you said, especially with the pandemic, a lot of us thought that Americans were very unhappy with the president's and the administration's response. I actually don't have a good answer for you.
Mr. Arvizu, are you and are many Americans maybe, or the so-called elite, missing something, missing the reality? Is there such a big gap that Mr. Trump is feeling that the rest, his opponents, are not understanding well?
I think that's very true. That's very true. But, you know, for example, we've seen just in the early results of this election that large numbers of Latino voters have chosen to support Mr. Trump.
Yep.
Again, overall, they're supporting Biden. But traditionally, Latinos from Central America, from South America, they've supported the Democrats in very large numbers. And that is not happening right now. So that's something that, you know, analysts need to think about. But, you know, you mentioned, you know, the elites. Yeah, you know, I mean, clearly there is a disconnect between people with different educational levels, social and economic levels, traditions. That's something that we as Americans need to think about. Both sides need to think about, really.
In your opinion, after this election, will America get closer, get together after this period of polarization, or the fear of protest and further radicalization is real?
I'm very concerned. And again, I'll be very brief here. I certainly hope that Mr. Biden will become the next president, because I think we need somebody who has a good character and is emotionally stable in the White House. That matters a lot. But the results of this election are very sobering and very worrisome. I think every indication is that our country will be even more divided than before. I think the hardcore, the militants on both sides will be less inclined to try to work together. And so we're going to have some big problems here in America primarily, but also in terms of foreign policy, which I care about a lot. I feel very bad. Again, the president is you know, he's in charge of the administration. So with respect to NATO and overall foreign policy, I think it will be better. But our friends and even our foes will realize that you know, America is not speaking from a position of strength. You know, this is a weak and divided country, and that's not good for our foreign policy.
And what can you say about the media, who was definitely against Trump, the majority of it probably, and the only ally that had at least on the international public eye was Twitter for Donald Trump. How come he has such results almost against all the media and some of the strongest analysts and opinion makers in U.S.?
Well, Twitter and Fox News, you know, certainly are in his. That's a very difficult one, Ilva, because again, you know, I'm speaking personally here, but as someone who has always trusted the so-called mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, you know, the traditional outlets, I have never believed everything they say 100%, but I know people who are professional journalists from these organizations, their editors, and you being a professional journalist, I know your training was in the United Kingdom, but you know that for these professional organizations, there are certain standards that they insist on, fact checking. And people make mistakes, but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, and I'm not talking about opinion, I'm talking about actual news reporting. It needs to be based on facts and verified sources. Mm-hmm. I believe that. And I think most of the Biden supporters believe that. But because of social media, a lot of things are just opinion, and they're just made up, and not just opinion, but they're designed to create chaos. We call it the parallel reality. And I look at some of this stuff and I think that's crazy. It's just not true. I know it's not true. But if you are in the American heartland and you read President Trump's Twitter, if you listen to Fox News, you're going to believe that. You're not going to believe the media sources that I believe in. So that's a big problem. And I can't explain that.
And a final question, Ambassador Arvizu, when do you think this will be over? Do you have a prediction? What is the expectation? When we're going to know the winner?
I think in a couple of days, we will know what the outcome is. We have to see whether there is going to be a challenge in court. I think these states, there's about 6 or 7 where it's very, very close. They will have to go over their tabulations to verify the results. And there's a process for that. And because we are, not a single unitary government, each state has to process it differently, certify the results. And then the Electoral College, I don't have the exact date, but I think it's December the 13th or something like that, that the Electoral College has to report the results. But we will know before that what the outcome is.
Thank you very much for talking to us, to Euronews Albania.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone, and thank you for the invitation. It's good to see you again.